in. Okay, cool. So it just takes a bit of time for it to go live sometimes, but that's great because then everyone's connecting to audio. And it always says like I'm streaming now, and then Facebook's always a delay, so I'm not sure. Okay, great. So we are live on Facebook and the bootcamp group, and we are live on Zoom. So awesome. So welcome to the final episode of the Mindset Transformation Show for 2020. I realized I was looking at the wrong camera. It is really awesome to have all of you guys here, and I have a very special guest for you, which is Steve Hinson. And we came together for the US Paraclimbing World Championships in 2018, I think it was now, which seems a lifetime ago. So much has changed. So instead of me introducing you in probably not the best way, Steve, why don't you tell us who you are and what it is you do in the world today?
From the athletic side of things, I am a adaptive climber and a runner. I am a below the knee amputee. It's from a childhood injury, and I've been running for most of my adult life, competed in a few marathons and do a lot of trail running and mountaineering and such, and then picked up climbing a few years ago. Mostly it started as a cross training for prepping for a spring marathon, but then eventually became my like 1B sport, to running being the 1A in certain ways. But it's a very addictive sport. And so I threw myself into the competitive scene after a year or so of climbing, and then competed in the national championships and was able to qualify for the world championships for Team USA. I did well enough at the national championship to make the USA team, and then and so Adelaide was my mental coach preparing for the national championships, and then she also helped me get ready for the world championships. Which, I mean, you know, just being able to compete on that scene as a relatively being new to the world of competitive climbing was pretty amazing. So appreciate all of the help that you gave me for getting ready for that.
Yeah, it was super fun.
And of course, the whole point of climbing inside is to take those skills outside. And so I do a lot of climbing outside here in Colorado, USA.
So what really got you hooked into climbing?
Well, it's just such a unique discipline of just, it wasn't really like anything I'd ever done before getting ready for it, but also some of the aspects that I'd taken from my running career before facilitated the transition well. You know, my strength to weight ratio was pretty good, and then also it was just such a challenge. When I first started climbing, I really wasn't very good. I had times where you know, you're always trying to figure out your body, whether you've got two legs or one or whatever you're dealing with. And there was one time early on where I was just a total mess on the wall. And so, you know, there's a few different things that you can kind of adapt your equipment to prepare for climbing. And so usually some people wear a sleeve outside of their leg to help with some extra stability. And I never typically did when it was just walking on a day-to-day basis, but before this gym session, you know, I went in and I was like, okay, I'm gonna wear a sleeve today. And it was a good thing because I was just flailing on the wall, and I was like, oh my God, this leg is gonna come off. And it would have if it wasn't for this sleeve, keeping it from falling on my belayer down below. So, you know, it was a good challenge, but then ultimately you do see that progress as your skills develop, as your confidence improves. And eventually I did find that I wasn't too bad at the sport.
And then what took you from like enjoying doing it as like a cross training and like a fun thing to then be like, okay, I want to compete in the nationals and then the world championships?
Well, here where I live in Colorado, it's just outside of Boulder, Colorado, which is a big hotspot for a lot of competitive athletes. And even the adaptive climbing scene and the adaptive running scene, for that matter, is very strong out here. And so a lot of the folks who who are adaptive climbers would always go to the national championship. And so after I'd been climbing for like 4 or 5 months, I still quite bad. But they were like, yeah, you got to go to nationals. You got to go to national. But I was getting ready for a marathon, and I was like trying to train for both. I'd just be terrible at them both. And so I committed to, I was like, I'll do it next year. And so having access to just seeing some really amazing adaptive climbers and what they were doing on the competitive scene really made it kind of a natural transition to be like, okay, I've got to try this out.
And then when you started training, what made you decide that you wanted to kind of go down the mindset training route as well?
I like to take kind of an academic approach to climbing, toward training, whether it's for climbing or for running. And so, I'll read like the books behind it and stuff. And one of the books that I really enjoyed was written by Eric Horst, I believe, where he has a philosophy that there's 3 equal parts to what you look at with training for climbing. One of it is the technique, one of it is the physical aspect, and one of it is the mental aspect. And when you're training, that tends to hold up pretty true, when you're actually performing, and then one of them might be way more important than the other. But when you've got a solid basis of each one of those 3, I think it puts you in a much better spot for whatever you're trying to pursue on the climbing side of things. And we all know how to train physically and technique. For physically, you focus on strength, you focus on endurance, fitness, all of that. And when it comes to technique, you just go climb a bunch. But how is it that you train the mental side of things? And that I think is more nebulous and more difficult to pinpoint. And so I had the opportunity to work with you, where it was something that just kind of came through the pipeline, where it was like, yeah, absolutely, I need this. And especially being pretty new to the sport, those some aspects of, you get high up, it gets a little scary sometimes. And whether things like overcoming fear or building confidence, or just having a really, what is it that you go to when you have those moments of, I really want to push through this move, but I feel like I'm going to fall. And so having your mental component there to be able to successfully make that next maneuver.
What do you feel is, like, for you, what do you see being the number one mental demand in climbing?
I think it depends on what it is that you're working on. Like the mental demands of what you're doing in the gym is going to be totally different than what you're going to be doing on some sort of we've got a really easy big free soloing route right here in Boulder. It's like 5-0, which on the European scale is pretty low, like in the 5B range, I think, on European climbing scale.
Free solo is the one without ropes.
Yeah. And it's basically a scramble for a climber. Like, they call it a hike for a climber or a climb for a hiker. But also it's very exposed, and there are spots where it's like, oh, I don't like this. And it's slab, which slab I always complain about, because it's not necessarily very conducive for a leg amputee climber, because when you're climbing on slab, what that generally means is that it's not entirely vertical. It's going to be more of what would that be? Less than 90 degrees. So there's a lot of friction involved, a lot of footwork involved, and you really want to drop your heel as low as you can. And when you're dealing with one ankle being only 90 degrees, and sometimes and come on, toe, don't pop on me right now. And so it gets a little heady, even though the climbing itself is quite easy. But if you're looking at something in the gym, generally what that's going to look more like is that you might just be pushing yourself to the limit on a grade, and just like I had a project that I just finished last week that I've been working on for over a month, and you get all of the moves dialed in, and then you feel like you might be a little bit off on a sequence, and you're pushing yourself to the limit, but being like, I can do this. And so, that was one of those techniques that you had helped me out with quite a bit in terms of, not necessarily letting like when you feel like your head's going to that space of, oh man, I feel like I'm going to fall, like switching it to, I can push through this. I've done this move before. I know what I'm doing here. And so finally completed it. It was a nice monkey off the back. But those
Yeah,
are
amazing. Congratulations. It's so satisfying when you complete a project.
Yeah, absolutely. But like each one of those two type of mentalities are very different.
Mm. And so what do you feel, talking about the techniques we use, what do you feel like your go-to mindset techniques for making sure you're in the right space for the climb you're doing?
Well, it's been interesting because one of the things that you see with climbing is there's a level of skill progression that comes along, and also that's true from each one of those three pillars I mentioned before. Your skill improves in technique, your skill improves physically and mentally. Some of the mental hurdles that I dealt with, leading up to that first nationals competition. Some of those aren't quite the same challenges as what I'm going to face now, just as a natural improvement of confidence and experience. And so these days, the biggest thing, but also some of those foundational pieces are still there. It just looks a little different. Like when you're first starting climbing, there's a natural fear of falling, but when you're on top rope, there's no reason to be afraid to fall. Like all it's going to be is just a little drop. And so, it becomes more of a pushing through doubt and all of those type of things. And these days, it's more of like, I finished this project and it was top roping. And so the first thing after I finished it, I saw one of my friends who had belayed me on it before. And I was like, yeah, I got through. And she's like, oh, so you're going to lead it now? I'm like, gosh, dang it. And so and so leading is its own form of barrier, like mentally, just because the falls aren't quite as, in the gym, it's generally going to be fine if you take a fall on lead. Outside, it can be a little scarier if you're taking a big whip. But in the gym, it's never fun to like fall 4 feet on, whether you're on top rope or lead. So, and then there's the extra physical component of having that other thing that you do where you're making the clip. And so, it's so to go back to your question, the mental barrier these days is just being brave on lead and trusting that you do know what you're doing. You can make these moves, and the added component of maybe you're going to fall a little farther if you do fail. That is not really that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that's when you're switching the positive self-talk? Is that like your go-to method for pushing through this and climbing your best?
It's I think that's part of it, and then also I think a confidence aspect of being on lead and really climbing to the limit is another aspect where I just need to do it that much more. You take more falls, and then eventually the falls become less scary, right?
Yep. And then how do you build your confidence to tackle these climbs?
I think there's a couple of elements to it. Anytime, let's say that you are wanting to tackle something on lead, if you've top roped it before and you have the experience of, I know that I can climb this route. I know what's waiting for me, and I've got certain, like the hardest part dialed in. It'll be fine. And then that's certainly helpful. But I think there's also an element that I still need to work on myself, where you're on-sighting something on lead, and that it is going to be a little bit challenging for you. And that especially comes into play when you're climbing outside. So the difference between when you're climbing outside versus in the gym, all of the quick draws are already set up for you. There's already an anchor built. You know what kind of plastic you're pulling on. It's just a different type of route. Whereas when you go outside, you're like working off of a guidebook or working off of seeing a route on your phone, and you think you have the right climb, but hopefully you're not on something that's just like a completely different grade than you're anticipating. And then the bolts are further away, further apart, and the rock might be very different, 5 feet to the left versus 5 feet to the right. And so, you can kind of read it from below, and you can talk to someone else who's climbed it before. But when you're doing it for the first time, it's it's going to be a little bit of a adventure. And then plus, someone's got to lead it, because when you're climbing outside, let's say if you want a top rope at first, either you or your partner or someone else has to set up that top rope to get to climb up to the anchor first, leading the route, setting up the quick draws, and then setting up that top rope. So if your partner's not really feeling it too well, and then it's like, well, if we're going to climb this route, I guess it's going to have to be me. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it's a bit of a different head game in terms of just going into to something unknown like that.
Mm. So do you feel you pull on like past positive evidence showing that you can do this, and then you bolster that with like your self-talk to feel the confidence when you're climbing something like lead climbing outside?
One of the things, the approaches I like to take with it is really easing into it, and just starting off with some nice confidence boost, easier climbs, and going out on like a longer climbing trip or something like that, and then just go and knock out all of the easiest routes on a wall, and then being like, okay, this is fine. I've got a good feel for what this style of rock is going to be like, and so and then jumping up into the more elevated grades.
Yeah, I love that. So building your confidence up by doing smaller things and easier things, and gradually increasing the challenge until you meet the one you want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what was it like coming to the nationals and the world champions? Did you feel competing in the competition added stress or pressure? Did you do more stress or more pressure from like competing on the world stages and the national stages?
To an extent, it was something that you and I worked on quite a bit in terms of how is it that you release that pressure heading into it. We did a lot of work with meditation and things like that, and I found that super helpful. And so, going into the competition itself, I felt like we had really prepared it as much as possible, and a lot of it, just came down to those other two elements that, I was proud to be there. I thought that was just pretty humbling for me to just be around some of these just absolutely extraordinary climbers, and some folks who had just been doing it, for decades. And so it was a chance to kind of see, okay, there's a whole lot more room for growth in terms of like my performance and in terms of my strength. And so, I was happy with what came out of that. What was, I think, probably just as great of a result from it was I took a couple of weeks off afterwards, but then I was going to Cambodia for work about a month later or so, and ended up spending a few weeks climbing in Thailand. And between the training on the physical side of things for that, and then also just all of the mental prep that went into getting ready for Worlds, it was just, that made it just such an amazing experience, just climbing hard every single day in Thailand and for like nearly 3 solid weeks, and just making some great friends, and also led my hardest routes that I've ever put up outside. And so I think it really set the stage for just a really nice leap forward in terms of my overall climbing.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I realized you went to Thailand after. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's basically one of the great climbing destinations. It was developed quite a long time ago, several decades ago. Lynn Hill put up a lot of routes over there, and so the scenery is just extraordinary, and then plus just the climbing culture in general is just outstanding. So I just basically showed up with all of my gear and had a rope and draws, so that immediately makes you pretty popular, and made a best friend that day, and we just went out and climbed every day. People from all over the world. So it was just anytime a climber gets a chance for doing some destination climbing is a very memorable experience.
Yeah, that's super cool. And just going back to the world competitions, because a lot of the athletes in the boot camp, although we've not had races this year, obviously when we come to races, competitions, challenges, there's always, or even doing adventure stuff in Thailand, sometimes we have our own expectations or doing nervousness and anxiety because of the competing element. What did you find was like the key strategy for you that helped you keep calm and relaxed during Worlds?
I've been competing on the running side of things ever since I was, in my early 20s, and I did some international stuff running and did some big races. So that certainly helped having that experience. But of course, this is an entirely different sport. And so when it comes to like the warm-up routines and the getting ready, a lot of that's the same. I had my same playlist when I was getting ready for the climbing comp that I always listen to before a race. But then there's so much of it's new that it's there was an element. Meditating really helped in terms of like you're like what in the hole, like there's two people ahead of you or so before you're getting ready to climb. And then so those butterflies start getting to you, you're getting your climbing shoes ready, put on, or in my case, wrenching on my climbing foot. But it's the meditative aspect really helped. And then also one of the things that we talked a lot about was like, what's your routine before you're really trying to dial in for a big climb. And so, there'd be like a typical way of just making sure that you're taking a couple of good, big, deep breaths, and then, just looking up at the wall, having some sort of positive self-talk, being like, yeah, I got this. This is cool. And, even if I didn't really, but at least telling myself that I did. And a lot of that I think is super transferable for whatever it is that you're getting ready to, whether you're stepping to a start line or getting ready to tie in on a wall.
And that was my next question. How do you feel doing all the prep for the Paraclimbing World Championships? How do you feel that's helped you? So you've mentioned it helped you in Thailand, but how's it helped you in your other sports and in other areas of life?
Well, it definitely helps on the running side of things with taking some of the pressure off of running. When you're training for, a long race like a marathon, like the training's the hardest part for it. So, so much of it is just a grind to get to the start line. And I mean, the hardest part of a marathon is everything that comes before the race, right? And so having another outlet for, like for those days where, it's like, it might be not a great day to go run. And so, you get out there for 20, 25 minutes and you're like, oh man, this is just such a slog. But, there's still some other, I might get to the gym, to the climbing gym, and they'll be able to get a really quality workout from that standpoint. And so that really balanced things out nicely. And also one of the things that, that's great with where I live, and I just love about the two sports, is that they're both very social. And so that's really how it is that I would see my friends. And so like I've got my climbing partners, my climbing buddies who I just see on such a regular basis, just because unless if you're bouldering, you really don't climb by yourself. And then with running, I've got like my groups that I would run with twice a week back before the pandemic hit and running groups went by the wayside. But that made it so, like that's what I did to see my friends, was I'd either go climb or I'd go for a run. And so it just created a really nice balance altogether.
And before we talk about the pandemic, but before we started recording, we were saying how in Colorado you've been hit by not only COVID, but also the forest fires. How do you feel like kind of increasing the ability to push yourself in your sport has helped you better handle this crazy year?
Well, a lot of times with both of the two sports, I really like having that next goal that I'm training for, the big thing that I'm pushing to happen. And so, it was just like one thing after another, getting scratched off and being like, okay, what am I going to do next then? And so, before I go into any calendar year, I kind of have a chicken scratch or kind of a to-do list of things that I'd like to accomplish for the year, and then also some longer term goals. And so for this previous year, in March, I had a trail half marathon that got canceled. Like it was right when everything started getting crazy. 2 weeks later, it was supposed to be the Paraclimbing National Championships. The New York City Marathon has been one that I've been trying to get for for years now, and I finally was set up to run this year, and it of course was canceled. But the thing is that they aren't going away. It just and they'll at least keep the fitness from being in totally bad shape, and found some other just goals that were still responsible. I had a week where I did 6 in Colorado what we call 14ers, or 14,000 foot peaks, which in meters I believe that's 4,200 or so.
Oh wow, nice. And you did 6 of them.
Yeah.
Wow, that's high.
Yeah, so just trying to find like some there's ways out here in Colorado where you can we've got 54 I believe altogether, so they're pretty accessible, and they're not like the French Alps type of mountain summits. Most of them are like hiking, or you can do as a trail run. But just trying to find other ways to still be able to accomplish some goals, and just set up for future adventures. Like, of course, like all of the climber bums, I went and bought a van, so being able to work on building it out, and just hopefully 2021 is a healthier, safer year, and we can just the mountains aren't going anywhere, and the races will be back.
Yeah, so do you have any plans for next year, or like what kind of mindset are you going into 2021 with?
A similar one to 2020, although with just a little bit more of a preparation that we'll see what actually happens. For the paraclimbing world, they're doing a actual World Cup type of situation, to where they've got a couple of events happening in Europe, and then there's going to be another World Cup event here in the US, and then there's going to be a paraclimbing World Championships in Moscow. And I don't know exactly what the qualification process is going to look like for that, but that's certainly something that I'd like to be able to do again. And then and then for the racing side of things, I mean, we've got some scheduled for March where it's like, we'll see, but but it'll at least give something to start training for. And then the registration for New York City was rolled over to 2021. So in November, I'll still be trying to run the New York City Marathon.
That'd be really exciting. And also, I feel November's like a good enough distance away for it to actually potentially happen.
Exactly, that's totally my hope. I mean, New York City got hit pretty hard out here. Also, hopefully the vaccine will make it so that it can come off. I mean, there've been talks at different points about running marathons wearing masks and things like that. And, I mean, like, I don't mind climbing in a mask, but I sure don't want to run a marathon wearing one.
Yeah, it's hot in that mask.
Yeah. So, it's basically just putting together like a list of want to do and hope to do, and we'll just see what's really feasible.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else that and we're going to have a Q&A session, so you can start thinking about questions for those who are listening. But you've been so great in sharing what works for you and how does it apply to different areas of your life, which has been super cool. But before we kind of go into the Q&A section of the show, is there anything else that you would like to add that I may have missed?
I don't really have anything in particular. I know, with being an adaptive athlete in particular, that's part of the reason why, you'd have me on rather than some of you've had such amazing athletes and over your series that I'm certainly humbled to be invited. So, I imagine there are probably questions that'll come through about what's the difference between the adaptive athlete element, but also, I'd be curious as to what your listeners would be interested in hearing. And, I can just preface that by, sharing that I've been missing my leg for nearly 20 years. And so I'm a pretty open book. And so folks don't have to worry about whether anything would be offensive. They can ask away.
Cool. Okay, so guys, you can start asking your questions. If you're on Zoom, you know the drill. You can put it in the chat. And on Facebook, for those listening, you can put it in the comments and we can start going through some questions. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to warm everyone up. Okay, it's loading on Facebook. So while you guys think of a question, actually what's been really interesting for me is I've started climbing in Lillehammer, and they have a climbing gym right next to my co-working space. I've been bouldering because in Wales, you guys made me go up on the wall, and I will 100% say it's terrifying. I don't like the sensation of falling, and the guy pretty much pulled me up. So I've been actually bouldering here, and then doing some of the automatic where you clip in, and you can go up without the person belaying you.
Audibly.
Audibly, yes, thank you. That was the word I was looking for. And I would get to the top and be like totally, because it's weird trusting this machine which just has the rope at the top, and then you're meant to like jump off the wall to go down. And whenever every time I was like, okay, I can do this, and then I'd think back to the World Championships and be like, all of you crazy climbers doing these insane routes. And I was like, if you guys can do it, I can totally like do this like tiny jump off this wall to come down. But I've been telling the climbers there, because they were like, what do you do? And obviously I'm a performance mindset coach, and I've worked with paraclimbers, and I started talking about what you guys did and the levels of the blind athletes and those who are the paralyzed from the waist down. And they're like, they didn't know paraclimbing existed. It's very, very small in Norway, but they do have a team of a couple of people here. But they were just like completely kind of mind blown that someone could do what you guys are doing, especially when you have a sight guide at the bottom and then you're kind of going up based on what someone is telling you, which is insane. I remember, was it the Chinese guy we watched, and he just kind of like raced straight up the wall?
Oh, well, the Japanese visually impaired climber, I believe his name's Yuri.
Thank you. Visually impaired is the word that I was looking for as well.
Oh, it's okay. I think a lot of visually impaired climbers refer to themselves as blind climbers too. But Yuri, I think his name's Yuri, over in Japan, he's just such an amazing guy, really nice guy, and then just a awesome climber that when you're spectating, like at the World Championships, watching the visually impaired climbers, it's pretty surreal because the entire audience has to be completely quiet so that the climber can hear the person calling. It might say, move your right hand 90 degrees up, and it's 3 feet, no over left. And so they'll be down there making these calls, and then you'll see this make this amazing move, and the entire crowd is just wanting to be able to let go and cheer, except you don't got to be quiet so that he can make the next move after that. And then once he finally tops out, and then it just set a release of all of that anxiety of wanting to cheer this really cool guy on.
And he was quick. Like, I can believe how quick he was.
Yeah.
And how accurate as well. It was crazy.
He's won several world championships.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. He was absolutely mind-blowing. So I think you might actually escape the questions. Everyone's very quiet. It's been like a super intense week, 30 days even, and we're on 35, 36. So I think everyone's mind is kind of slightly slowing down, especially with the run up to Christmas. But if they have any questions after the show, is it okay if I send them to you, and then we can put like a feed in the group?
Yep, absolutely. I'm always happy to be open and available.
Awesome, because I think it's probably going to be questions come up tomorrow. So if you guys, last chance to ask any questions, otherwise we'll thank Steve, because it was awesome for you coming on. Oh, here we go. Really interesting. So I think you just like kind of everyone is tired and dead and it's holiday time. But thank you so much for coming on. It was so great to catch up and to hear what you're up to, and to know that you and your family are safe with this year that's been going on. And we'll definitely stay in touch and have you come back on again to talk about nationals and your preparation for that and the worlds that are coming up too.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for all of your help and support for getting through these events, and also for your invitation to come on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so just on the final note, I'm having a lot of people say thank you. It was really interesting. And that's kind of the consensus. So thank you. It was super great. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Adelaide.
Bye.